Hey everybody, Hollis Darby here with Army Signal Training, and in this training video we're going to be going over the VLAN Trunking Protocol. So, this is a VLAN Trunking Protocol. The VLAN Trunking Protocol, or VTP for short, is a Cisco proprietary protocol that runs over trunk links to synchronize the VLAN databases of all the Cisco switches in a VTP domain. A VTP domain is an administrator group of Cisco switches that are configured with the same VTP domain name and password, and the password is optional. The VTP information is sent over trunk links between the Cisco switches. Now, don't let the name confuse you. You know, the VLAN Trunking Protocol. VLAN Trunking Protocol kind of alludes that it has something to do with trunking. And in reality, it has nothing to do with trunking. It has everything to do with the sharing of VLANs or the dynamic replication of VLANs, but it has nothing to do with trunking. In fact, the only thing it has to do with trunking is the fact that VTP information is sent over trunk links. What VTP does for us is dynamically shares VLAN information from one switch to another. Where this becomes applicable is if I was a network administrator in a large environment, say a campus network or something, maybe I have 50, 60, 100 switches, to go to each switch or even to telnet or SSH into each switch, you know, manually and create these VLANs is pretty tedious. I mean, you got to think you don't just have one VLAN. You could have 5, 10, 15, 20 VLANs. So that's just a lot of overhead, and if you're not getting paid by the hour, why do it that way? So VTP will kind of do this for us dynamic. For us, we kind of create this server-client infrastructure to where the server will share VTP information to the clients dynamically for us. So it saves us a lot of work. But the problem with that is it's kind of a double-edged sword. And being that how dynamic it is and how quickly and willingly it is to erase and replace VLAN databases in our switches, if we make a mistake, we can literally take down our entire infrastructure within seconds. So we really, when it comes to VTP, although we do need to use it, we just need to ensure proper implementation of it and to make sure we have a couple of good best practices in place to keep from making one of those devastating mistakes. So let's keep going. So how does it work? VTP works by using configuration revision numbers and VTP advertisements. These advertisements are like updates. All switches send out VTP advertisements every 5 minutes, or when there has been a change to their VLAN database, like the creation, deletion, and renaming of a VLAN. Now, I understand that this isn't true for all 3 types of VTP operation modes, but in theory, this is how VTP operates. VTP advertisements contain a configuration revision number. This number is increased by 1 for every VLAN change. So that's every creation, deletion, or renaming of a VLAN. This configuration revision number keeps incrementing up higher and higher. The default value, like if you pulled a switch fresh out of a box, is 0. So how does this all tie together? When a switch receives a VTP advertisement, it compares the configuration revision number to its database. If the receiving VTP advertisement has a higher configuration revision number than that in its own database, it's essentially going to delete its database and replace it with what it's being received by the other switch, which a lot of times is exactly what we want it to do. In some cases, not. If the configuration revision numbers are equal to each other, the switch simply balls it up and throws it away. It kind of disregards the VTP advertisement. Now, if the VTP advertisement or the VTP configuration revision number being received by the switch is actually lower than its VTP configuration revision number, it will actually it will send an advertisement or an update to that switch and update their VLAN database. And you'll see a lot of this as we go on. So the VTP switch modes. A switch can be in one of 3 VTP modes: server, client, and transparent. Server, which is the default mode by the way, has the ability to create, delete, and rename VLANs. It sends and receives VTP updates or acknowledgements, and it saves the VLAN configuration file. Client mode, however, cannot change VLAN information. It can only receive it. It sends and receives VTP updates, but it does not save the VLAN configuration. So what it receives from the server mode, it simply keeps in its running config. If that switch loses power or you restart the switch, it has to relearn all those VLANs again. And then we have the rebel, that is transparent mode. And it's a rebel because it has the power to create, delete, and rename VLANs, but it does not necessarily share that information with anybody else. It's only locally significant to that switch. So when it creates a VLAN, for example, it doesn't advertise that out to anybody else. It's only local to that switch. With that, it also doesn't listen to anybody else. So the server sends a VTP advertisement to the switch that's in transparent mode, and it simply balls it up and throws it away and says, I don't care. I'm going to do what I want. Like a lot of privates in the Army, you know what I mean? And then, but what's good about it, and this is only if you're using VTP in version 2 mode. Transparent mode, though, will take a VTP advertisement from the server and actually forward it on to a potential client. So it does have the ability, if it's in version 2, to take an advertisement and pass it on. But if you have it just in version 1, it's just going to ball up that advertisement, throw it away, and the client that could be hanging off of that switch will never know. So by default, these switches are going to come up in version 1. We need to go in and tell it to be version 2. And if you have one switch in the domain running version 2, all the switches in the domain need to be running version 2, or actually must run version 2. Another thing transparent mode does, I just hit on that. It does not listen to VTP advertisements or updates, but it saves the VLAN configuration in its memory, much like the server mode would. So as you can see, server kind of is the head honcho, just like you would think the server would be. Has the ability to create, delete, rename. It saves that in its database itself, local to its memory. It sends that information to the client. The client takes that, puts it in its running config, doesn't have the ability to create or change anything. It's getting all of its information fed from the server. And transparent, being the rebel, it's not going to participate or listen to anything from the server. If it's in version 2, it'll go ahead and pass on those advertisements, but disregard what they say. And all the VLAN information that's configured under the switch running transparent mode is saved on the switch's memory itself. So how does it work? We have this LAN manager, network management node down here, and we're going to SSH into this switch. This is the VTP server, right? And we're going to create this VLAN here, VLAN 10. So we create VLAN 10. What happens is the server will now increment its configuration revision up from 0 to 1, send a VTP update or advertisement. They're the same thing. I'm using them loosely. Over to the client. The client's going to look and say, well, my configuration revision number is 0. Your configuration revision number is 1. So you're higher. I'm going to go and delete my VLAN database and update it with what you have. In which case, VLAN 10 is added to the switch here, which is the VTP client. That's how it does it for us dynamically. Oh, as well as the VTP client also at that point will increment its configuration revision number up to 1 as well. So the server and the client at that point will be at the same revision number. Alright, configuring VTP. This is probably one of the easiest things to configure, but the scariest thing to implement. To configure VTP, it's all done in global configuration mode. And to set this, the mode, it's just simply VTP mode and whatever mode it's going to be, whether it be server, client, or transparent. Same thing with the domain name. It's just VTP domain followed by the domain name. Now note right here that it is case sensitive. Same thing with the VTP password. We can implement the VTP space password followed by the password. Now again, case sensitive. And lastly, we're going to do the VTP version, in which by default it's at version 1. We're going to increment it up to version 2. That version 2, one of the biggest thing it does for you is allows the transparent mode VTP switch to pass on that that VTP advertisement. It has other things in there with SNMP and the adding token ring, but where it really impacts us and most implementations is the fact that it will go ahead and not listen to but forward on a VTP update or acknowledgement. And we're going to go in and actually demonstrate the configuration for you and the replication process. So there's only really two commands that you need to really familiarize yourself with VTP. Or okay, I'll give you, it's three commands. The biggest one is going to be the show VTP status, and it's going to bring up a status menu like this. As you can see, it says my VTP version is 2. Now, this VTP version 2, that's not actually the version you're running in. That's the version the switch supports. And all Cisco Cala switches are going to support up to version 2. So it's just telling me that I can run in version 2. Because if I look down here, the VTP version 2 mode, it says it's disabled, which means I'm running in version 1. When it says enabled, it means I'm in version 2. Going right under that is, we got the configuration revision number. This is the hot item here. So before I add a switch to my network, I want to drop this back down to 0. Make it the most susceptible to the network. So it will learn that VTP information and not accidentally, trump your server and say, no, I had the highest configuration revision number. Delete all your VLANs and add mine. We don't want that to happen because that's one of the incidences that could take down your network in seconds. So, and we'll talk about how to clear out that configuration revision number here, but this is how you can look to see what it's set to. Right here is the number of existing VLANs on this switch currently. The VTP domain name. Look, it's blank, which Cisco refers to as null. So this puts it at the most susceptible state it could be in. And this is where I was alluding to, if you saw the Facebook post where I saw I guess, I hate to call it just a misprint, but I guess a failed attempt at explaining VTP correctly by a Cisco Press book I was reading. But anyway, VTP domain name, when it's blank, it's null, right? So it's not going to stay null. The moment it hears a VTP advertisement from another switch that has a VTP domain name set, it will take it. So let's say this is switch B. Switch A, their domain name is Army Signal Training, and it sends a VTP advertisement over to switch B, which is this one right here. It's then going to add Army Signal Training right here dynamically for us. Where the Cisco Press book was wrong is it said it would do that for the password as well, and that is not true. And I believe I've heard that in a CVT nugget before, way back when. The password is not going to be sent dynamically. That wouldn't make sense anyway, would it? I mean, so you're going to send my username and password no matter what? There's no authentication to this? There is. That is why it's very important for us to configure a VTP password so that if that switch is plugged in this null state like it is, it doesn't automatically just suck in that domain name and VLAN information. So that password is an authentication mechanism in there. By no means is it strong, but it's at least there. Okay, continuing VTP pruning. We're not going to talk about that. And we've covered the VTP mode. Oh, right here. Operation mode. VTP operating mode right here. It's server. That is the default. This is where you'll define whether it's going to be a server, a client, or a transparent. Alright, and I allude to another, I said 3 commands total. Okay, so this is the show VTP status. You also have the show VTP password. As you can see, it doesn't give you any indication of what the password might be in here. This MD5 digest has nothing to do with the password. It's a digest of the entire VTP configuration as a whole. So to see the VTP password that might be configured on a switch, you simply type in show VTP password. And another one is just simply show interface trunk. Because, like I said, VTP only communicates over trunk links. So if your VTP is not operating appropriately, if you can't get VTP information to convert over to a distant switch, one of the first things I've ever looked into is, am I trunking? So the show command for that would be, or trunking on that interface, and that would be show interface trunk. And if you're confused by trunking, or if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say trunk, please refer to one of my trunking videos that I've already created. So here's a warning for you, and this is a serious, no BS warning that we need to ensure that we adhere to, particularly in production or enterprise networks, and that is adding a new switch in client mode. In client mode does not prevent it from propagating its VLAN information to a server. Again, just because it's in client mode does not mean it won't erase a VLAN database on a server. Which doesn't make sense. You would think, well, he's the client. He shouldn't be able to do that. But it all boils down to this configuration revision number. So if the client has a higher configuration revision number than the server, and that would only happen by introducing a new switch after this has been running, then the client's going to update the server, and then that's when your network's going to start crashing very quickly. So to keep going, a VTP server will synchronize to a VTP client if the client has the higher configuration revision number. You must reset the configuration revision number back to 0 on a new switch, or a new switch that you're introducing into your network prior to adding it. Must do that, just to alleviate the uncertainty of literally destroying your network for 30 minutes to an hour, or whatever depending on your level of technical competency, it could be weeks. I mean, I kid a little bit, but literally this will take down your network. So how do we reset this? Well, there's 5 steps, and don't let the 5 steps, kind of confuse you or make you think, oh my gosh, this is difficult. It's actually really simple. The biggest thing is we need to ensure that, one, the switch is not connected to the network and doesn't get connected to the network until it's prepped, so to say. And if it is already on the network, rip it off immediately, and these steps still apply. So we need to make sure it's disconnected from the network. We need to set the VTP mode to transparent. And then we're going to go into the flash and delete the VLAN database file. And I'll show you how to do that. After we delete that VLAN database file, we're going to set it to a fake VTP domain, a bogus one. So our VTP domain that we're going to be using is going to be Army Signal Training, right? All lowercase, all one word. I'm gonna take that out, and I'm gonna make it, VTP domain Hollis. And then I'm gonna put it in client mode. Once I have it in client mode, I'm gonna save my config, and I'm gonna reload. I'm gonna reboot the switch, power it off, power it back on. Once the switch comes back up, I'm going to go ahead and configure it with the correct VTP domain name, the correct password, the correct mode in which I want it to operate in, whether it be server, client, or transparent, and the correct version, which would be version 2. Once that's been accomplished and prepped, then I will introduce that switch to my network. And after that, that's when you'll start doing your show VTP status, making sure you're learning that that dynamic VLAN information. That's when you'll do your show, VLAN brief, to make sure you're dynamically learning those VLANs from the server. So this is the live topology that we're going to be working with. We have switch A, B, and C. The trunks have already been pre-configured. So essentially, we're just going to go through the initial configuration. I'm going to show you a couple of quirks along the way, and how some of this information is kind of sent dynamically for us. So let's go and get started on that. Let's pull up the hyperterminal here. I'm in switch A. Let me pull this up. So in switch A, I'm just going to verify, again, this rides over trunks, that my trunk is up. So I'm going to do a show interface trunk. And looks like my trunk is up. Another thing I can do to verify, because this is the only thing I have plugged in, is show CDP neighbor. And I know it's kind of cut out behind my ugly mug here, but so if CDP is contacting the other switch, that means I have a pathway between the two switches. That's great. Also, I can see that I have the trunk running on FAT/Ethernet 0/1. Wonderful. All right, so first thing I'm going to do is to show VTP status. Right now, this switch it's capable of running in version 2. Its current configuration number is 0. It has a number. The number of existing VLANs is 5. That's by default. I haven't configured any, and I'll show you where those 5 VLANs are coming from here in a moment. The VTP operating mode is server, that's default. I have no VTP domain name set yet. The VTP mode or version that's actually running in is version 1 because VTP version 2 mode is disabled. And to show, I'm going to do a show VTP password, and as you can see, there is no password configured yet. So another thing I'm going to show you is this, this VLAN.dat file that I was referring to. If I do a show flash, I have my config file, my private config file, and my image for my iOS, right? That's it. That's all I have in Flash. But the moment I start generating a VLAN, it's going to create something called a VLAN database file. So let's first set up VTP, and then I'll start generating some VLANs and pulling it over to switch B. So I'm going to go into global configuration mode, and let's look at some of the options that are available to us. It's not that many. We've covered pretty much all of them. We have the domain, mode, password, and version. Those are the ones we're going to concern ourselves with first. So the first thing I'm going to do is let's go and do version 2, as well as VTP mode. And this is where you would determine if it's going to be a client, server, or transparent. In this case, I'm going to leave this one at server. It's going to tell me it's already in server mode. Next thing is going to be the VTP domain, and that's going to be Army Signal Training. Great. In fact, I'm actually going to disconnect one of my switches to further show something else later. There we go. So I set the VTP domain name, and I'm not going to set the password yet because I want you to see something. I've already done the version. Wonderful. So let me do show VTP status. I can see that the configuration revision number has incremented because I'm messing with VLAN information now. I created a domain name. So now that I created a domain name, it's going to send out an advertisement and say like, hey everybody, I have a name now. And you'll see we're in switch B, it replicated over there. Also, you can see here that I'm now running in version 2, that the domain name is Army Signal Training, and it is still in server mode. Wonderful. So let's go over to switch B real quick. Let's check out where switch B is and how it's doing. Let's do a show VTP status over here. We can see that it has a configuration revision number of 1 now. Now remember, the default is 0, but here's what's interesting. This right here, I did not configure this in switch B. It dynamically learned that from switch A over the trunk port. As soon as I gave switch A a name, it immediately blasted out an advertisement. It said, everybody, I have a name. And as soon as switch B received that, before this was blank, it said, oh, I now have a home. And it added Army Signal Training as its domain name, as well as enabled version 2, which is pretty awesome. So I still haven't created any VLANs yet. So let me back up, go back to switch A. There we go. I'm going to go into global configuration mode, and now I'm going to start creating VLANs. Now, what I did earlier when I leaned over is I unplugged switch C, because what I'm going to demonstrate is how the VTP password does not replicate over. So that's going to be done at the end. What I'm going to do now is focus on replicating VLANs from switch A to switch B. So to create a VLAN, I'm simply going to go into global configuration mode and go VLAN 10. Now remember, my configuration revision on switch A was 1. So VLAN 10, name Army. VLAN 20, name Signal. VLAN 30, name Training, of course. And I'm going to exit out. Well, I'm going to wait for the status message that it applied the configuration. That's wonderful. I'm going to do a show VLAN brief. It's going to show me all the VLANs configured. Now, you remember earlier I said there was 5 in there by default. When I did the show VTP status, it said I knew about 5 VLANs. The 5 VLANs it's referring to, if you look here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Those are in the switch automatically. Those are default VLAN configurations in the switch. This is obviously your default management VLAN, which you never want to use. It's in there by default. And these you'll probably never touch ever again. Those are legacy. Those from the legacy days. But I did, however, create these 3. So now if I do a show VTP status, I will see that, bam, it is now up to 4. It was at 1, but I created 3 VLANs, so it incremented it up to 4. 1 for every VLAN creation. So now let's move over back over to switch B and do a show VTP status. And look at here. Its configuration revision number was incremented up to 4. Show VLAN brief. And I can see, wow, right there, it dynamically learned using VTP these VLANs. So that's great. So I think everyone kind of understands that concept. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to go back. I'm going to configure passwords to kind of better secure my VTP sessions. So I'm going to go in global configuration mode and just type in VTP password, and we'll name this one, Hollis. I'm going to exit that, go over to switch. Now, actually, let me go back over to switch 1. So I created a password on switch A, right? So I'm going to go into global configuration mode. I'm going to create another VLAN. So we'll call this one VLAN 40, name HUA. Exit. Go over to switch B. Now I'm going to do a show VLAN brief. Look, there's no HUA. Now wait a minute. Now VTP is supposed to be sending it over. The problem is on switch A, I've now introduced a password. So I need to now put the password configuration under VTP on switch B. So I'm going to go into global configuration mode here and type in VTP password Hollis. And again, it is case sensitive. Done. So now here's the problem. The HUA is not going to replicate over unless one of two things happens. I create or trigger an event on switch A by creating, adding, or renaming, or I wait the 5 minutes that it takes to send its periodic updates. So what I'm actually going to do is toggle back over to switch A, and I'm just going to rename one of the VLANs. I'm going to rename HUA. So I'm going to go to VLAN 40, and I'm going to name it update. Now that I've done that, and I go back over to switch B, trigger that event, I can see update has now posted. They update VLAN. Wonderful. It would have worked by itself. I just didn't feel like waiting the 5 minutes it would have periodic update it does every 5 minutes. Okay, lastly, I'm going to plug in my third switch that we have yet to configure and to see what happens. So reach over here. You should see a status message here in a moment. Great. Show interface trunk. Make sure the trunk link is good, which it's on port 2, and it is. So let's jump over to switch C. I can't type C. There we go. So now I'm in switch C. This shows VTP status. As I can see, the configuration revision number is 1. 2, I can see that it's on 6. So there's obviously a communication error between switch B and switch C. So let's go over to switch C. I keep wanting to type C in there. Show VTP status. It's learned everything else, but if I do a show VTP password, there's nothing there, and that's a problem. So what I need to do is type in config t VTP password Hollis. Like I said, this is where the Cisco the CCNP switch book, this relatively new book. I'm sure there's been a new one written since this one, but it said that the domain name and a password would be sent dynamically, and that is not true. We just proved that there. Only the domain name will be sent. The password will not. So you can rest assured that if you implement a password into your VTP strategy, that you're adding a layer of security from having someone introduce an erroneous switch into your network and crashing your VTP or VLAN database, excuse me. So I don't remember if I showed you this yet or not, but now that we've created all these VLANs, let's see, show VLAN brief. I don't know if I've given it enough time to replicate over yet. I sure haven't. Again, it's going to have to wait on this 5-minute trigger time, or I can go over, create a new VLAN somewhere. But let's say I want to make this a client, by the way. I didn't show that earlier. It's simply VTP mode and then whatever mode you want it in. So client. It's good not to have a bunch of servers running around in your network. You really just want one main server and a bunch of clients off of it, or daisy chained off of it. So that's the best practice. Don't be lazy and move to a switch that's in client, change it to server, and then implement or create a new VLAN and then leave it. I mean, one centralized server and then a bunch of client switches. So that's the best practice for that. Let's see if it's had enough time to generate that VLAN information. And it has. So as you can see, that 5-minute trigger time was finally ticked down, and it was able to receive that periodic update from switch B. And there we have it. So to look at this VLAN database, if I do a show flash, now that I know I have VLANs in here, before I just had this config.txt, this private config, and my IO private config, iOS, but now I have this VLAN.database. If I do a show run pipe include VLAN, there's nothing there. Now, disregard this. This has absolutely nothing to do with, the creation of VLANs and all that stuff. So disregard that. But there's no true VLAN information in this switch. It's all right here. So what happens? So theoretically, if I did a, erase startup, right? And I erased my entire startup config and I reloaded the switch, my VLANs, however, although I won't have any configuration information, my hostname will be gone, my access control, all that stuff will be gone, but my VLANs will be there because they're stored in this VLAN.database file. So to get rid of that and to change this configuration revision number, the show VTP, to get this to increment back down to 0, clear out your configuration revision number. If I do a show VTP status here, I can see, oh man, this guy's at 6. I want to take it back down to 0 before I add it back to the network. The first thing I'm going to do is, one, you don't want it on the network, so I'm going to take it off the network. There we go. And get a status message. There we go. First thing I'm going to do is go to config T, VLAN mode, and I'm going to change it to transparent. Not VLAN, VTP mode transparent. From there, I'm going to change the VTP domain name to something different. So in this case, I'll just do Hollis. I'm going to go ahead and do the no VTP password just to get rid of that. And if I do a show VTP status, looky here, it's at 0. So at this point, it's safe to go ahead and add it back to the network. But what I would highly recommend is to go in and also delete the VLAN database. And to do that, you just simply type in delete /VLAN.dat. It's going to ask you, are you sure? I am sure. And this won't take effect until I reboot my switch. But as soon as I reboot my switch, all the old VLAN database will be deleted, my configuration revision will be back at 0, and I can safely manipulate the configuration to where it needs to be to safely add it back to the network. So I understand this has been a very long video. I hope everyone got something out of it. I just want to make sure I'm clear on a lot of the concepts of VTP, because improper application of VTP can definitely destroy your network. So please, if anyone has any questions or comments about this topic, please leave them in the comment section below, and I look forward to answering your questions. Until the next video, have a good day.